Welcome back to HNM Story Time. I'm Miss Samantha, and who remembers who we talked about last week? It starts with an A. Who remembers? Abram! Very good. Well, do you remember how Abram lived with his family for so many years? He was 100 years old. And then God told him, okay, pack up your stuff and move to a new place. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew God's promises. God said, you have no children right now, but I'm going to bless you with a son, and then he's going to have kids, and then they're going to have kids, and your family's going to be so big that you can't even count them, just like the stars in the sky. Abram was 100 years old, and his wife was 90. They're older than my grandparents. But God is a God who keeps his promises. We learned that with Noah, right? With the rainbow, God keeps his promises, and he loves us. Well, today's story is called Isaac is Born. That means God kept his promise and he gave Abram and Sarai a son. So let's read our story. You ready? So our story is found in a few different chapters in the Bible. Genesis 15, 17, 18, and 21 all have a little bit of a story. God gave a special promise to Abram. He promised to give Abram and his wife a son. As a reminder of his promise, God changed Abram's name to Abraham. Abraham means father of many. Abraham and his wife Sarai waited many years, but they still did not have a child. And then God changed her name too. Now she was called Sarah. Abraham still did not stop believing God's promise. Abraham and Sarah kept getting older and older and older, more than most grandparents today. But one day, some angels visited Abraham. Next year, this time, they said, Sarah will have a son. Sarah was sitting in her tent, listening to Abraham and the visitors. When she heard the angel's words, she laughed out loud. She and Abraham were almost 100 years old. She knew that no one her age ever had a baby. She was just too old. The visitors knew that she laughed, and they said, anything too hard for God? She tried to say, I didn't laugh. I don't know what you're talking about. But they knew the truth. The next year, God's promise came true. Sarah had a baby boy, just as God had said. Abraham and Sarah named him Isaac. Wow, I wonder how many times that's happened, that God tells you something and you just don't believe him. You laugh and say, psh, that'll never happen. Haha, good one. But we can't do that. When God says something, we need to believe it, because God can't tell a lie. He is good to us, and whatever he says will happen, it will happen. He keeps all of his promises. All right, so let's go talk to Mr. Eli and learn our verse before we get into our snack and our coloring pages and learn our Abraham song. Are you ready? Let's go. Look who I found, everyone. Say hi to Mr. Eli.
Hi. Hello. Hi.
Hello. All right, so we learned more about Abram in today's story. We met him last time, learned more this time, but this time his name got changed. It's not Abram, it's
Abraham.
Abraham. Who knows an Abraham? I've met an Abraham before. It wasn't this one, but I met one before.
I've met two.
I think I've
My
met
whole
two
life.
also. Me too. You know an Abraham? Oh, are we singing that song? We should sing that song. Miss Shannon, Miss Shauna, sing that song. So we met, we already met Abram. Now he's Abraham. Then his wife Sarah, or Sarai, who is now Sarah, are really old, right? And so there's this thing about having a baby. And what did Sarah do?
She laughed at God. She thought it was funny. She's like, I'm too old to have a baby. That's not happening.
I mean, honestly, I would have thought the same thing. But what did the angels say when she left?
But not laugh, because it's going to happen.
That's true. So remember we learned last time when God promised Abram, now when he promised Abraham and Sarah, don't laugh because God keeps his promises. We learned that with Noah, right? With the rainbow, God always keeps his promises. So what is a promise that God has told you? Maybe you heard him in your heart when you're praying. Maybe you read the promise in the Bible and so you know it's his words. What is a promise that God has told you?
You promised a job. And I, for a second, thought I was like, it's probably not going to happen, and passed it off. But it happened. literally the
You got
next
a
day
job?
they called me and said, hey, you want to come in for the job? And I was like, wow.
God keeps his promises. That's so cool. So remember, whenever God tells you something, you need to remember it, write it down, tell your friends, tell your mom, tell your dog, I don't know. And remember what he tells you because his promises always come true. All right, let's grab our verse sheet out. So we are going to learn our verse still in Genesis chapter 21, verses 2 and 3. Sarah gave birth to a son, and Abraham called him Isaac. Well, it's pretty easy to remember. It's just telling us what our story's about. So we can remember the three people. Sarah gave birth to a son, and Abraham called him Isaac. All right, let's try that together. Genesis 21, verses 2 and 3.
Genesis 21, verses 2 and 3.
Sarah gave birth to a son,
Sarah gave birth to a son,
and Abraham called him Isaac.
and Abraham called him Isaac.
Okay, that was one time. Let's do 2 times. Genesis 21, verses 2 and 3.
Genesis 21, verses 2 and 3.
Sarah gave birth to a son,
Sarah gave birth to a son,
and Abraham called him Isaac.
and Abraham called him Isaac.
That was 2 times. Let's do 3 times. Genesis 21, verses 2 and 3.
Genesis 21, verses 2 and 3.
Sarah gave birth to a son,
Sarah gave birth to a son,
and Abraham called him Isaac.
and Abraham called him Isaac.
Very good. So now we remember those 3 people who are very important. They're going to be in our next story also. We have Sarah, Abraham, and Isaac. Do you guys know a Sarah? We had a Sarah in our class. Do you know an Isaac? We had an Isaac in our class. All right, so now we are ready to color and sing our Abraham song and eat our goldfish. So everyone have a great week. We will see you next time. Bye.